Hey YouTube, and welcome back to another episode in our watercolor series from Manny School of Art. Last week I think I mentioned that we were on a trip to Myrtle Beach, and on the way back we decided that we wanted to stop in Colorado. Now Colorado is of course very well known for its mountains, but on the southwest part of Colorado there's another side of it that is absolutely beautiful. So we decided to go to Mesa Verde National Park, um, in the southwest corner of Colorado, where the cliff dwellings are located, and spend the day. While we were there, we did a little bit of sightseeing and a little bit of hiking and a little bit of photography. And this episode is actually going to be based on some of the photographs that I took from our trip. So this composition is going to be a composite. I'm going to be working from several different photographs that I took while I was there. And I'm also going to be modifying the mood or the color scheme. Alright, so I've already got the entire composition sketched out, and it's featuring a juniper tree, and it's got a raven that's going to be landing on one of the branches, and then in the background there's some distant mesas. So what I'm doing right now in preparation for painting is I'm actually blocking out the juniper. Um, Even though it's a dark tree, I actually want to do some texture techniques, and I think it'll be easier to do if I um, block it out and keep the colors out of it for the time being. So once this step is done, then we'll be ready to start the painting. So the fresco is all done and dry, so I'm now ready to start kind of creating the mood in the background. And what I want to do is I want to go from a peachy color near the horizon line and work my way up to a blue color near the top. So it's kind of an early morning type setting. Um, Now, of course, we know that orange and blue make either a brown or a gray. So in order to prevent that from happening, I actually use a little bit of crimson between the two to create a little bit of a barrier. So I went from that peachy orangey color to the crimson to the ultramarine blue and then the phthalo blue on the top. Then I took my 4-inch brush, clean and dry, and then just kind of gently went over the whole thing. Okay, once the sky was completely done and dried, I was able to go ahead and start blocking in the distant mesas. I created a peach color by mixing yellow with the cadmium red and then added a tiny bit of brown to it. I wanted to block those in before I actually did any part of the green. The tops of the mesas at Mesa Verde, believe it or not, are actually green. But I didn't want a really bright green, so I took and I mixed up some green and I added just a little bit of orange to dull it. And then on the lid side, I added just a tiny bit of yellow just to brighten it up just a tiny little bit. I used those same two colors to put in the slopes of the mesas. The mesa on the left is going to be in shadow. So when I get to that side, I'm going to take the same mixture, but I'm going to add just a tiny bit of the violet or purple color to make it just a little bit darker. I then mixed up this golden color by using the burnt sienna and a little bit of the cad yellow. And then I added just a little bit of blue to kind of dull it because I didn't want it to be too bright. Then I pre-wet the paper and used this base in order to create a nice soft color that will act as the sand on the close side. I added a little bit of brown and a little bit of blue at the bottom just to darken it up just a little bit. Watercolors tend to dry rather light, so I went ahead and did a glaze on the mesas that are on the shadow side by basically adding just a little bit of purple to it. Okay, now after I dried the paper once again, then I went ahead and removed the frisket so that I can start working on the tree. So even though this juniper tree was dead, there was a lot of real subtle changes in color on the bark, where some areas still had bark remaining, other areas the bark was completely gone, and the wood underneath was kind of dried and had like hints of gray and orange and other colors in it. So I decided for this one to do something that I rarely do, and that was to actually put in the deepest, darkest value first. And the reason for that is because I'm not using black. And I know that I'm going to have to do multiple layers in order to get this really nice and dark. So the mixture that I used to get this dark color was just burnt sienna with the ultramarine blue. Okay, the next thing to do is to start actually blocking in the raven. Now the raven is black, but when you look up close, especially when the wings are open, there are some other colors in there other than black. So I decided to go ahead and work with this lighter color first, which is a mixture of orange, yellow, and a little bit of brown, and put in where the light colors are going to be first. And then later on I'll come back and start putting in the darker colors. Now I'm using my number 2 brush, and I'm using the same mixture that I used for the tree. I'm putting in my first layer of dark, and I'm kind of paying attention to the brush strokes. I need the brush strokes to go in the direction of the feathers, and I also want to do kind of a dry brush technique so that I'm not losing all of that light color that I put in underneath first. So this is the first color of the dark values, and I'm going to pay close attention to the brush strokes, but I'm also want to make sure that I'm using the dark values to separate the wings from the head from the body from the tail, etc. So this is a little bit more tedious than it looks. I forgot to mention that the legs, especially in the photograph, are really difficult to see. So in the drawing, I actually went ahead and used a little bit of Frisket to kind of protect the thighs and the talons, just so that I can locate them a little bit later. As you guys know, working with the dark colors makes it very difficult to find your pencil drawings. So I just went ahead and blocked them out so that I could see them a little bit later. Now for the darker value, I'm using brown and the ultramarine blue, where the lighter gray is actually brown with a little bit of violet. Still paying attention to the location of the highlights. Those are the areas that I gotta really be careful with, because it's very difficult to try to put in the highlight once you go with a dark value, which is one of the reasons why I kind of avoid working with the black when I'm working with watercolors. Having said that, I will be using a little bit of black at towards the very ending of the painting, just to kind of darken up some of the deeper shadows. And there are some little subtle areas that I actually did with the black, just because the gray colors just weren't opaque enough. But for the most part, I try as much as possible to not use the black when I'm working with watercolors, just because I like to have variety of colors in the shadows. Now while the raven is drying, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the tree. I mentioned earlier that the tree has a lot of little variations in colors, so I pre-mixed some olive color. I've also got a little bit of this orangey color with a little bit of brown to dull it, so that's the cadmium red with the burnt sienna. And the other one, I took a little bit of green and a little bit of blue just to dull the green a little bit. And this is kind of like an underpainting, so I want to make sure that I keep these colors pretty diluted so that I can go back later and add in some other features. As I block in the tree, I'm going to be switching from all these different colors and just randomly putting in some of the lighter colors. I'll even touch a little bit of yellow here and there. But this is not the final color, so this is just the underpainting, so I don't want to get too carried away. But I want some of these colors to show through when I put in the textures later. The tree is an important part of this composition, so I want to make sure that I keep it interesting. So I want to make sure that I have plenty of color, and I want to make sure that my shadows are going to be nice and strong, and my highlights are going to be nice and strong as well. The light source is coming from low on the left hand side, so I'll be keeping that in mind as I start putting in my colors. But it's important for me to break up these colors. If you use a solid color and you don't add any highlights and shadows, it makes the image look very two-dimensional, and that's not what I want to do for this painting. All right, back to the Raven. So now I'm going in with even a stronger color. It's actually not a stronger color, it's just that because you're building up the layers, every layer that you put on makes the color look a little bit darker. I'm still being very careful to make sure that I allow some of that warm colors that I put down earlier to show through. And I want to make sure that I keep the head separate from the wings, the head separate from the body, etc. So the shadows kind of play an important role in that. While the raven is drying, I'm going to go ahead and start doing the textures on the tree. Now I've switched over to my liner brush, and I'm going to start building up those the strands, I guess you can call them, on the bark on these. There's a little bit here and there, and it creates all kinds of textures. I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the color mixture. So I have that olive green color that I mixed earlier, but I also have that dulled orange color that I used. And here and there, I'll touch a little bit of the yellow just to add a little bit of highlights. But overall, I want the tree to be relatively dark, but not quite a silhouette, because I want to be able to see the textures created by that strandy bark. Once I get done working with the bark, I'll check the shadows again, and if I feel that they need to go a little bit darker, I'll actually go ahead and hit them one more time. Um, just like I said, the more layers you create, the darker you can get, which is one of the reasons why I like working with layers, because that way I can kind of stay in control when I'm trying to create a specific effect. Now when we do the abstract painting, which will come later, you can get a little bit more wild with it, but for this one, I kind of want to stay somewhat in control. So here I took the frisket off the legs, and now I'm going back in and just kind of fine tuning the raven a little bit. We're getting close to the end of this painting, so now this is where all the little subtleties kind of make a difference. So alright, it's time to add some of the vegetation in the foreground. So I kind of pre-wet that little area there, and then I went in with a nice rich purple color. And the reason that I did that is because I want the purple and the green to mix to create a nice shadow. Um, Purple and green make a really, really nice combination when you're trying to get a nice dark green. Then I went with a little bit of a true green near the top and added just a little bit of the yellow just to brighten it up where the sun might be hitting it. For the yucca plants, I actually started with that dulled down orangey color that I mixed, which is just a cadmium red with a little bit of brown in it. And then while it was wet, I started with that olive green and started pulling up the vegetation. And I let the two colors kind of mix so that I get some nice variety. When I was looking at the drawing, I felt like the body of the raven looked a little bit on the skinny side, so I went in with that nice dark gray and thickened it up a little bit, and then used the same gray color to put in the cast shadows underneath the yucca plants. And just a little bit of vegetation in front of the tree just to kind of set it into the ground instead of having it look like it's just floating. After drying the painting one more time, I decided to check on the work by using my little mat board cutoffs. And after looking at it, I decided that I needed to do just a little bit more work in the sky and on the lower left hand corner. So I added a large yucca plant in the foreground to push that rock back just a little bit more, and I added a silhouette of a raven flying in the distance. And I think I'm much more happier with it now. What do you think? Alright, so here we get a little look at what the final product is going to look like. So I hope you liked it. I hope it was helpful. If you liked it and if you learned something, please share and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next week.